Hi, my name is Nicole Hind and I live in beautiful Bellingen in Australia, and right now I'm just near the beach, which is not too far away and it's gorgeous. And this is a video for Winspiration Day. There's a little bit of personal to that, which is that I have chosen to live in this place and that I really do believe that we can empower ourselves or be empowered or surround ourselves with folks who remind us that we don't have to live inside little boxes that are created for us by social norms, and that we really can do a lot more of what we want to with this wonderful life. And that's leading me into what this video is going to be about, which is a little bit about exploring some of the ideas around mental health that are sort of just blindly accepted these days. And I'm going to be doing that by talking a little bit of history, a little bit of theory, a little bit of context, and it's not going to be boring, I promise. It's going to be really interesting and eye-opening. And the reason why I'm doing that is just to make it really, really clear why and the tips that I'm going to talk about afterwards are really useful and have a lot of purpose, and that they're really grounded in reality. They're not kind of, I guess, made up nonsense ideas. There's a real guts to them, and the idea is to, really give us some power, I suppose, to take some of that power back if we can sort of see through some of the ways that the wool is pulled over our eyes in that context. So towards the second half of the video, I will definitely be giving some more practical ideas that are outside the box and some tips that should help you really lean into who you really want to be and ways to deal with problems that invade and get in the way of who we really want to be in this world. So to give me the idea for what I was going to make this video about, I was actually sort of trawling some things online, and then I just suddenly came across, coincidentally, the creator of narrative therapy, which is the therapy that I operate under the umbrella of, and his name is Michael White, and unfortunately he passed away 10 years ago. But I was watching a video of him sort of introducing his ideas, or the ideas from narrative, to an audience, and he was doing it quite humorously. He started by asking the audience just to raise their hands if anybody had psychological needs. And he could see people sort of going, "Oh yeah, I mean, I guess so, everybody does, don't they?" And then he asked if people who had relationship dynamics, and you can hear a little bit of laughter coming from people, and obviously again it sort of seems like, well, of course, I mean, all relationships have dynamics, don't they? And then he starts sort of just saying, well, that, a lot of people have had relationship dynamics since 1969, or, psychological needs since 1924. I'm not getting the years right, but, around this time. And what he was sort of putting out there and sort of really encouraging people to grapple with is that the ideas of how we look at psychological needs and relationship dynamics, even right down to the naming of them, did not exist before those dates. They are constructs, and a construct is an idea. It's something that somebody came up with, and that people have come up with to explain some of the things that we're already experiencing. Now, it's not to say that people didn't have things in their head or relationships with others, and that they were better before we started, I guess, naming and exploring these things. But it's just to plant that seed that there's naming of these things, and the way that we talk about them is a construct, that it's an idea, that it's not it's not this stick on the ground that is a stick that I can feel and it's tangible. It's not maths. It is a theory, and it's important to, I guess, understand the historical context of the theory and where these things came from. And so if we go back even before, last century, and we go back into the century before, which is basically when we started to have a lot more individual notions in the European, or what we call the Western world now, about me inside myself, that I reach inside myself and find what I need and find resources and all those kind of things, and then I bring them out. And that also in here is where all the problems are. So if I and suffering. I mean, back in the day it was hysteria, that women were being studied by Freud for hysteria. And the interesting thing is that his original research was actually incredibly powerful, and what he uncovered was that all of the women that he saw suffering from hysteria were actually women who had been abused, often sexually abused. Somehow, through all of that, he kind of chucked that away and started going into all the stuff about people having obsessions with their mothers or their fathers and sexual obsessions and that kind of stuff. And he steered away from that, and that's happened numerous times in the history of trauma, actually, that every time someone has really, really uncovered the fact that A plus B equals C, which is me plus me being harmed significantly in some way, equals trauma, equals something that you see on the outside, a behaviour, an intolerance for being in this body, etc., etc. The same thing happened in World War I with the shell shock survivors. Initially, the work done with those men was really, really wonderful work, really powerful work. But when they realised, I guess, there's not an easy solution, and hey, we aren't going to stop having wars, it sort of gets turned around, and the victim is blamed instead of the reason why something like that might have happened, and therefore the perpetrators or the social context of why and how we allow this to happen to other human beings. So it's how we kind of bring blame back to the self, the individual. Now, that's not to say that we're not going to be responsible for our choices and our behaviour, but I don't know if you can already see that there's a mismatch here between how responsible we can be from just the inside of ourselves and how responsible the context is for some of the ways that we experience the world. If you then think about things like diagnoses, such as, depression or anxiety, but also things like borderline personality disorder, bipolar, etc., that they're all the ways that have been created, I guess, to try and explain a set of behaviours or the ways that somebody is. And that a lot of that can get really bogged down in psychology around, what the inside of me that's dysfunctional, that doesn't work, that something's wrong with me. And we lose sight of the whys and the social context. And what we must remember is that when we started to even look at people in this way, that when we started to really examine the individual, the internal nature of the individual, it was all in this context of an industrial society. Prior to industrial society, when people lived in villages, that wasn't really a thing that people did. You kind of lived in a community and everybody had a place there on some level or not. Not to say, again, everything was perfect and idyllic and everyone was wonderful, but just that everybody existed and no one was, I guess, thought to be less useful than anybody else, or, that it wasn't necessarily that there was something innately or internally wrong that you're doing or that would lead to, X, Y, and Z. I'm not explaining this very well, but what I'm trying to, sort of put it in the context of it is that when we really became interested in the individual is when we created a society that required people to be useful in a particular way. And that way was to make industry work. So people could work in factories, that people could pump things out so that other people could make a lot of money. And if you couldn't do that, or you weren't interested in that, or you weren't very good at that, you were basically useless in some way or another. So it started kind of creating a society which suddenly people, for instance, who were incredibly valued, say artists and musicians and creatives, were kind of not, or specialists even, not particularly useful in terms of a cog in the machine that's just going to pump things out. If we look at people with disabilities, people with mental health issues, pregnant women, etc., they're all people who were suddenly not so useful in this industrial sort of revolution, and therefore we started to sort of define all those people as problematic. And right now, to this day, we have absorbed a lot of that knowledge and we think of it as fact, but the reality is it's all created in a context of Anglo heterosexual male dominant culture. Does that make sense? That it's not actually, like I said, it's not the stick, you know, it's not maths. It's something that was decided and then has been picked up and continued to be worked on in a particular way and studied and explored based on the historical context. It's a contract, it's an idea, it's a way of thinking about something. And it's not to say that it's useless and we should just chuck out the baby with the bathwater. The idea is to then expand the idea that you are not doing something simplistic or even childish or whatever if you choose to think outside of that construct. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that you don't have to buy into how you have been defined by the society that we live in. You can choose to look at things in a different way. One of those ways, and this is when we're going to get into some more ideas and some practical tips, and that might make all of this fit in to self-empowerment a little bit more clearly, is that you can choose to look at things from a place of strength or from a place of creativity, and basically the most important thing is in a way that is useful and helpful to you. A really well-known example of a way to do that is what's sometimes called externalizing, where instead of saying I am the person and I am the problem and therefore having absolutely no control or influence on the problem at all because it's just me and it's who I am and I need to go and see the psychiatrist so that person can address me as a problem and fix me up. What if we just don't think about it like that? Because that's an idea about what's wrong. Here's another idea. And sometimes these ideas can work together. They don't have to be, polar opposites. But here's another idea. What if you were to start thinking about the problem in a way that was just more useful to you? In a way that helps you grip onto it when you're most struggling? In a way that helps you get other people on board with the you that you most prefer to be. So, that you might start giving the problem a name for itself that actually fits with you, a way to start to see it as something that isn't just innately in here that you can never do anything about. A really simple example that most people are aware of is the idea of the black dog. So the black dog has become a really big metaphor for depression. There are a lot of great books about it. I believe it came from, I should have researched this, a very famous, maybe Winston Churchill, a very famous politician who referred to his own depression as the black dog. And a lot of people, I think one of the reasons why most of us have leaned into that and been like, oh, I can really see that, is because it does give it a name. And as soon as you have that name in your head, it also comes with an image, and it comes with sensations, and it comes with an idea that this is not who I am. This is something that I experience, this is something that happens to me, this is something that walks alongside me, sometimes whether I choose it or not. This is a thing that, that maybe I would like to be out in the kennel a little bit more than what it is. Maybe I don't want it jumping on the bed all the time. Maybe I don't want it sleeping with me. And once you start to think like that, it gives you a little bit more power around what to actually do. And that can be really creative. It doesn't have to be, it's not less real or it's not less serious if you choose a different idea or a different way of looking at a problem. A really familiar way that sometimes some people I work with talk about what might be known as trauma is that when we start working together, initially it feels like this emptiness that's happening to me feels like it's just part of my body or not part of me, that there's no possible other way for me to experience this. But once we start getting into that imagery of, when you hear someone say something really powerful with a really strong metaphor, a really strong image, we can grab onto that a little bit. What jumps into your head? what do you feel? What sort of images float? What character in a movie or a book does this remind you of? What's something that gives that a bit of guts? And I've heard people give many different descriptions of what it is, and often it becomes this something more tangible. And the more we make it more tangible, the more we can actually examine it. We can examine it in ways that help us understand it. It's a little bit like know your enemy. And once we understand it, and you know more about it, we know more about where it came from, we know more about the ideas that support it, then we can also understand a bit more about the conditions that make it really big and really debilitating, that make it paralyzing. And then maybe we can start to work out ideas about what makes it a little less. Just a little less. It's that step-by-step kind of stuff. And again, like I said, sometimes those can just be ideas, that you can start to be thinking about when that happens to me, what am I going to picture sort of happening instead? But you might not be really that into visualizing stuff. In that case, you want something a bit more practical. That you might actually find something physical that helps you kind of grip onto when you're trying to pull yourself out of something that's not helpful for you anymore. I hope all of this is starting to make some sense. There's another thing alongside this, which is also about, I talked about historical context before, but it's also talking about what if we just honour different people's voices. So again, if that other context is predominantly Anglo, hetero, male sort of idea, then what are the other ideas about problems from other places? What do, a history of feminism, a history of women think about the ways that we might deal with problems? What do different cultures, sorry, my dog's just jumped in. What do, people of Indigenous heritages who've been, certainly in Australia for more than 50,000 years, how do they think about this stuff? Why is it that there's only one way that we think is right, or that is the most successful or correct way to deal with problems? So there might also be some answers there, and it's not about cultural appropriation and, kind of taking stuff and then pretending it's yours. It's more about, well, is this more useful to me? Another way to sort of zoom in on that a little bit is that a lot of women I work with find it, who are mothers, find it very, very hard to think about themselves as separate from their child. And so my question would be, well, if that's really hard, then do you need to? Most other cultures have what's thought of as a collective culture, so that there's lots of people involved in a family and in the raising of a child, and that people bounce off each other. And there's certainly some ideas from African womanism which talk about the I you, that I don't exist without you, that it's always this, I guess, circular relationship. And a lot of women I know who are not African, as well as women who are African, really relate to that's really empowering for them to be like, oh, thank God there's not something wrong with me because I feel so attached. Ideas around, stepping away from attachment are, again, very, very Anglo. Now, there's nothing wrong with needing space, of course, and if that's you, that's you. But the point is, I guess, to expand the notion of what is okay and what's not, what feels okay and what's not, what doesn't, and really trying to separate yourself from the social norms and from what we're told. The same thing is around success. A lot of the time we're terrified of even just saying, I feel sad, I feel stuck, I feel miserable, I've messed something up, because we have these success stories from what success looks like. And success looks like, a big house and 2.4 children and a happy marriage and an excellent career that's fulfilling. etc., etc. And then when we don't have one or any of those things, we can feel like a failure. And other people can put that on us without even realizing that they're doing it, because we all buy into the same ideas that are presented to us. And a question to ask yourself when you're wondering if something is a social context idea or whether it's something that's really about you, a good question to ask yourself is, if I feel like ... about myself, or if I think I'm a failure because I don't own X, Y, and Z, or I haven't achieved X, Y, and Z, who benefits? Who benefits? Do I benefit? If I rush out to the shops and buy a bajillion things to make my perfect house, maybe, but most of the time it's a very short-lived feeling to go out and shop and then come back and spread some things around, and then it's like, oh, the good feeling's kind of gone. Who benefits is the people who are selling us things. Who benefits if we are all policing each other in terms of people not living the right way, or people not doing things that are inside. Now, I'm not talking about stuff that really isn't okay, violence and treating people badly, and this is in the context of loving kindness. This idea of stepping away from failure stories but it is about this idea of the government doesn't need to control us if we control each other. No one needs to police us if we're policing each other, and we're pretty often nicely under control. If we think that we keep striving for things that maybe we can't achieve, or that aren't right for us to achieve, even amidst a context of unhappiness, that we kind of can lose sight of what's really important, and also for fighting for what's right, for taking care of each other. We can be convinced in so many ways that other people are messing things up and doing terrible things, and they're all bad, terrible people. They don't deserve my compassion, or my caring, or my kindness, or my actions. And we are told, we're given stories like that all the time. And again, they're ideas. And some of those ideas benefit certain people and certain powerful institutions and certain shops, certain things, far more than they actually benefit us. So I guess that's coming up to the end, that I've kind of given some history and some, ideas around, even just some context around where constructs and ideas actually have come from. And the idea of that was to expand our thinking around, well, what is possible? If I don't just blindly accept X, Y, and Z, that's, it's not a stick and it's not a fact necessarily. There's some usefulness to this for me, but next to that, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to work on what's really useful for me. I'm going to find my own strengths and my own skills, and I'm going to do that by remembering things that I've done that I'm proud of, by getting people alongside me who get me and who I get. By kind of leaning into that place, and also finding names for problems and understanding them in a totally different way from just how Joe Blow over here is telling everyone what it's like. I'm going to figure out what it's like for me. And I might do that in a context of looking at the way other people and other cultures, and maybe other people who are more like me, actually see those things. Or maybe people that I didn't even know I was like until I started looking into it, and then being like, wow, that makes sense to me. And I'm going to use that. I'm going to run with that. And I'm going to make that useful for me so that I can have a lot more of the life that I want. And then the final part was, again, more of that sort of historical context, but putting it more in a modern day sense of just bringing ourselves back from the brink of, oh, I'm a failure and I do everything wrong and I'm dysfunctional and all of those I'm yuck words. And just reminding ourselves, when I feel like this and think like this, who benefits? And really asking that question from a sort of a deep place. And if the wrong people are benefiting, then it might be time to think about a different way of addressing some of those sort of issues that we can all be invaded by. I think that's it. I hope this has been useful. I know it's a little bit all over the place. That's just kind of how I roll. I'm just really, really curious about people. People that sit with me, people that I sit with, people that come to see me, people that are just in the world, and I've travelled a lot. And so I've seen and experienced the ways that different people do things, and I'm more convinced than ever that just one way of looking at things and blindly accepted ideas and, you know, self-policing and pressure to do things by a certain book, it's just not right, and it doesn't work, and a lot of us are unhappy because of that. So if there's some other ways to think about that, I think more power to us. You know, let's lean into that place. Let's take some of our power back from, you know, these institutions and historical contexts and constructs that may not have even been created with the best intentions and may not be serving me right now. And what ideas do serve me and help me get more of what I want, live more of the life that I want, and make changes that I want to make to have a better life and maybe be a better person. I'm not sure. It's up to you. Happy Winspiration Day, and I might see you on camera some other time. Bye!